Alabama single mother Felicia Scott is given a second chance at happily ever after when a not-so-secret admirer from her past re-enters her life.
Fred was her meal ticket, and she knew that if she could keep him happy, that her and the boys would have a roof over their heads.
But Felicia's dream to give her man the ultimate gift becomes another woman's worst nightmare.
Fred wanted a child more than anything else in the world.
She wanted to make Fred happy. She was willing to do whatever she could do to keep him.
And later in Tampa, Florida, teenage temptress Victoria Jackson turns forbidden love into a family affair.
If I had known that Jeffrey was having an affair with my sister, I would have not married him.
But when it looks like she's soon to be out of the picture, it's another man who forces Victoria to make a deadly decision.
Shoot him, Vicky, shoot him.
He is pleading for his life.
Baby, don't do it!
Pleading with Victoria not to shoot him.
He started yelling, Vicky, do it, Vicky, do it.
It was just surprising that a young person like that would get themselves involved in such a violent incident.
Growing up in a single-parent home in Tuscaloosa, Alabama, has little Felicia Scott dreaming of one day having a family of her own.
Felicia Scott, she was a normal kid, grew up in a middle-class family, really had no problems.
Her father just wasn't in the picture and took no part in raising her. That job was handled by her mother and her grandmother.
When some children grow up in a single-parent home, they tend to look at how other kids are living, especially those with an intact family. So they start having these sorts of utopian ideas as to what that ideal family life really should be.
Before the ink has time to dry on her diploma, Felicia is already taking the first step toward having a perfect family when she dives into marriage with her high school sweetheart.
Felicia hastily married. She thought she was ready to be a wife and a mother. She wasn't.
But after 5 years of marriage and 2 kids, Felicia's overbearing attitude drives her husband away.
Felicia's personality was very dominating. In fact, it poisoned the relationship. Felicia's husband just couldn't take it anymore.
When she divorced, she didn't realize what a burden it would be to raise 2 little boys all on her own.
By the age of 23, Felicia is the living embodiment of everything she never wanted. A perpetually broke single mother, barely able to raise her sons.
She worked odd jobs, and she knew desperately that she wanted to be with someone, find a husband if possible, to help her with her children.
After several lonely and financially difficult years, a light at the end of the tunnel arrives. When Felicia runs into Fred Polian, a one-time admirer from her past.
Fred and Felicia actually knew each other from back in the day. So when they saw each other, they were really sort of reconnecting.
Felicia always suspected the older man had a crush on her. And now, at the age of 27, she's more than happy to give Fred a chance. Before long, Fred and Felicia start spending every day together.
Fred was an ideal match for Felicia because he was kind of reserved. He was not assertive at all. And this fit with what Felicia wanted in a man very well.
Fred worked at a place for troubled kids, and he had a real fondness toward helping kids.
Life with Fred is already proving to be the kind of relationship Felicia's been longing for her whole life. In their first year of dating, Felicia and Fred move in together, and Fred wants to take the relationship to the next level. He wants Felicia to have his baby.
Fred wanted to make a mark in his life, and he thought having a child, a daughter or son, would be something that would be special and hold him in high esteem.
The pressure is on for Felicia to get pregnant.
You know, in her mind, I think she felt like she needed to be able to have a child in order to keep Fred, because it was such a priority in his life.
The two waste little time trying.
Fred couldn't keep his hands off of her. He was all over her every day.
Nearly every day, Fred asked Felicia, "Are you pregnant yet?" She felt the pressure because every time he asked that question, what she heard was, "You're about to be on your own again."
A month later, Felicia approaches Fred and tells him what he's been dying to hear.
You're gonna be a father. Felicia told Fred that she was pregnant. This was the news he had been waiting for. He was so happy. He couldn't have asked for anything else.
But Fred will soon learn that there's nothing delicate about Felicia. And the only thing she's carrying is a deep, dark secret.
She was so determined to keep her man that she would do anything to uphold or keep this crazy and sick fantasy.
The desperate person does this, a person who feels like they have no other options.
1 year into their relationship, 28-year-old Felicia Scott gives her live-in boyfriend Fred Polian the ultimate gift when she tells him she's expecting his baby in Tuscaloosa, Alabama.
Felicia knew that part of the bargain for getting Fred to take care of her was that she had to give him a baby.
When Fred heard the news about her pregnancy, he was speechless. He was so excited.
But Fred's excitement will be short-lived if he ever finds out Felicia's secret.
Felicia had had a hysterectomy earlier in her life, so she knew from that point forward she could not have a child.
But Felicia needs to find a way to keep her pregnancy lie going.
Come in!
And when an opportunity presents itself in the form of her boy's babysitter, 17-year-old Carethia Curry, she jumps on it.
Carethia was babysitting Felicia's two boys.
Can I tell you something?
Yeah.
And Carethia confided in Felicia
I'm pregnant.
about her pregnancy.
Oh my gosh, congratulations. Carethia was a sweet young girl. She was 17 years old. She was somewhat naive. Let me look at you. She lived in the same neighborhood as Felicia. Now that Felicia knew Carethia was pregnant, she could match the timing of her fake pregnancy with Carethia's real one.
Felicia wastes no time setting her devious plan in motion.
Felicia told people that she was having morning sickness. She didn't wear maternity clothes. She didn't swell up.
She talked about, you know, the fact that she didn't have a big belly, but that she carried her weight in her behind. Fred was either the dumbest person for not realizing she wasn't pregnant, or he was the smartest person for helping her cover it up.
Fred never had a child before, so he didn't know what to expect with respect to a pregnancy. So he just went along with whatever was happening at the time.
The clock is ticking. Felicia has less than 9 months to deliver Fred a baby.
Where are the boys?
Oh, they're at one of their friends' house just playing. I really just want to be able to spend time with you.
Okay.
So how's she doing?
The now 29-year-old spends months playing the role of the naive teenager's best friend.
She feels like she's gonna be big.
Felicia started spending a lot of time with Carethia. They shared stories together about babies, about, having a new baby, what the experience would be like, sharing food, stories, things of that nature. They were inseparable.
And you don't think she's gonna come earlier? Because she seems She seems like she might be ready soon. I'm so happy for you. I really am.
Felicia knows when the day arrives, she only has one shot to get it right. So she spends the next 7 months doing her homework to prepare for a gruesome abduction.
Felicia went to a local health clinic to get brochures about C-sections and having home deliveries.
Felicia was committed to giving Fred what he wanted, this baby. She was determined. She had the eye of the tiger. There was just no turning back.
With Carithia at 9 months and her due date rapidly approaching, a by now impatient Felicia decides it's time to give Fred the baby he's always longed for. One day after shopping with Carithia and her mother, Felicia invites the expectant teen over to her place.
Felicia and Carithia grabbed some pizza and headed home to hang out at Felicia's apartment.
Oh, I'm sorry, Carolyn. This is for expected mothers. Okay. All right.
Felicia waits patiently for just the right moment to pounce on the unsuspecting mom-to-be.
It's an extreme plan, but she would do practically anything to please her man.
And later, in Tampa, Florida, Victoria Jackson must make a deadly decision between her married lover and her boyfriend of 2 months.
He is still bound with the shoestrings in front of his body. They tell him to get in the van. Victoria gets into the driver's seat. They pull to the side of the road, and now she's holding the gun.
Victoria wasn't willing to give up the relationship, even if it meant armed robbery, murder, and kidnapping.
In order to convince everyone she was pregnant, Felicia claimed to have cravings, the pickles and ice cream, and she looked at the exotic varieties, like her craving for laundry detergent called Pika.
In Tuscaloosa, Alabama, after almost 9 months of waiting, 17-year-old Carithia Curry is all that stands in the way of 29-year-old Felicia Scott's dream of giving her man the one thing he wants most, a baby.
Felicia planned to fake her pregnancy until Carithia was 9 months pregnant.
With her boys upstairs sound asleep, and Fred working late at the home for troubled kids, Felicia knows it's now or never.
She was cold, calculating, brutal.
It was a surprise attack. Felicia shot Carithia in the back of the head. Her body dropped and fell directly to the ground.
Carithia's down, so Felicia turns her attention to delivering the baby.
Felicia's so determined in what she's doing that she's throwing caution to the wind. She's on autopilot. She's a robot. She's separating her emotions and her feelings from actually what she is doing, this heinous crime.
Felicia can't make a mistake or she will never be able to please Fred, and this is all for him. It's time to put all she's learned about C-sections to work.
Felicia grabbed a razor blade and she cut Carithia from her neck down to her groin. She had only 7 minutes or so before that baby could go critical because of lack of oxygen. So she was moving as quickly as she could. Then suddenly, things went wrong.
While Felicia was cutting Carithia's abdomen open, she realized that Carithia was still alive. Felicia had to do something, and what she did was horrific. she shot Carithia again in the head. As Carithia bled out, Felicia continued the home C-section.
With the newborn finally in her arms, Felicia basks in the glow of success of her sinister scheme.
The baby survived the delivery. She was a healthy baby girl, breathing on her own without any complications.
Fred's due home from work at any minute, so Felicia rushes to clean the bloody scene and get rid of the body.
Felicia was on her hands and knees, cleaning up all the blood, scrubbing the floors, and throwing everything in the trash.
Carithia's body was placed inside a green garbage can. The top was put on it, and it was sealed up with duct tape.
Felicia drags the garbage can out of the house and puts it in the trunk of her car, only moments before Fred comes home.
Fred, it happened.
Fred couldn't believe his eyes. He thought it was odd, but he didn't question it. He was just happy to see his new baby girl. And he just melted.
When Felicia saw that Fred was holding that baby, for her, her prayers had been answered. All of the heinous actions were worth it. She was a mother to this child for Fred, and mission accomplished. She was in nirvana.
His reaction leaves no doubt in Felicia's mind that she's done the right thing. But there's still something she needs to take care of.
Felicia pointed out to Fred that there were lots of bloody towels and sheets that needed to be disposed of, and they were in the trash can. And she wanted him to take that out right away and just get rid of it.
Happy to do anything for the woman who's just given birth to his daughter, Fred dutifully follows Felicia's instructions and dumps the trash bin in a ravine 50 miles away.
Fred never asked any questions about it, but he took the trash can out of the trunk of the car and let it roll down the ravine.
Fred didn't have any reason not to trust Felicia. Then everything she did was pretty much perfect, and I assert that he really wanted to believe.
With the evidence disposed of, Felicia focuses on Fred and their new baby, who they name Kiyomi. But in less than 48 hours, her perfect family will start to fall apart.
Carithia's mother called the police and was reporting her child was missing and had every reason to believe that Felicia Scott had something to do with it.
She tells them how the three went shopping, and then Felicia and Carithia split off for dinner at Felicia's.
The only information she could give police was that the last person she saw her daughter with was Felicia.
2 days later, with Fred at work, the police pay Felicia a visit.
Felicia Scott?
Yes.
What were the police?
She answers the door, cradling a newborn.
She's mine. It was a miraculous home delivery.
Oh, wow. Okay. Okay, so have you been to the hospital?
She told us that she had a at-home birth at her sister's, which would have been in Birmingham.
She's only a few days old.
At this point, she produced paperwork that showed she had been, in fact, to Cooper Green Hospital.
Are you familiar with Carithia?
Felicia doesn't miss a beat when asked about Carithia Curry's whereabouts.
You know Carithia?
I know Carithia, but she and her mother fought a lot. Carithia probably ran off again.
Felicia said it was very possible that Carithia had just run away because of her unhappy home life.
On the way back to the station, Detective Hearing calls around to check out her story.
They decided to call the Tuscaloosa Health Department. Once they got in touch with the health department, they realized that Felicia had actually had a hysterectomy.
At that point, it became real. We realized that we needed to locate Felicia immediately because obviously this wasn't her baby.
Within 24 hours, detectives traced Felicia to her father's home in Norcross, Georgia.
Went inside the residence where I saw Felicia Scott laying on the couch with a baby on her chest.
Got the baby.
Why are you taking my baby? I didn't do anything.
Down on the ground.
Felicia stated to me that Carethia had given her that baby. That it was Carethia's baby, but that Carethia didn't want it, wanted her to have it, and that she gave her that baby and that she left that night just walking away.
Felicia felt that everything that she had done was worth it. She was okay with it in her mind because of love that trumped her crime.
Investigators have no way of connecting Felicia to Carethia's murder without a body, so she's released on bail. But 2 months later, Carethia's body is discovered at the bottom of a ravine near Felicia's sister's house. That same day, Felicia is arrested and charged for Carethia's murder.
Felicia Scott never admitted to killing Carethia Curry and never admitted to kidnapping the child.
Fred insists he had no knowledge of what was in the trash can. But when he admits to dumping it, he's arrested for kidnapping a minor and is sentenced to 20 years in prison. 2 years later, a jury convicts Felicia of first-degree murder. She's sentenced to life with no possibility of parole.
In her own twisted mind, with her own narcissistic needs, Felicia thought that she deserved to have that baby, anything in order to find pure happiness with Fred.
In the end, Felicia loses her man and the baby she desperately wanted to give him.
I believe Felicia faked her pregnancy to keep Fred. Plain and simple. I think that she knew that Fred wanted a child. I think she was in fear that if he knew she couldn't have a child, that he would go find someone that could.
The fact that someone would go through something like this for a man is absolutely ridiculous.
How does Felicia live with it afterwards? It's very simple. Felicia is incapable of caring about anyone but Felicia.
Felicia Scott took extreme measures to give her man a child, but she isn't the only woman willing to go to unspeakable lengths in the name of love. In Tampa, Florida, Victoria Jackson's involvement in a sordid love affair pushes her to commit the ultimate act of betrayal for her man. At the age of 16, Victoria Jackson is still trying to cope with the suicide of her father 1 year earlier, much to the heartbreak of her older sister, Crystal.
We lost our father at Victoria's the age of 15, and she took it very hard. She was an A student prior to that. Afterwards, she got into a little trouble hanging with the wrong people.
For Victoria to have such a close relationship with her father, and for him to be suddenly gone in that way, such a traumatic event in her life, would lead her to now look for another father figure.
Victoria's relentless search for love will drive her into the arms of two different men, a sinful situation that leads to deadly consequences.
Victoria found herself living between a man that was controlling her with his demanding demeanor and another man who controlled her through his finances. She's just a puppet.
In Tampa, Florida, 16-year-old Victoria Jackson comes out of a severe depression thanks to the new man in her life, 32-year-old Jeffrey Dampier.
By all accounts, Jeffrey was a pretty nice guy. But you're talking about a 32-year-old being involved with a 16-year-old that was Victoria's age at the time. So you're talking about a relationship that was wholly inappropriate and, as well, illegal.
Jeffrey Dampier was very sweet. He had this glow that would just make you just smile and laugh. And he had a very kind heart.
He bought Victoria lavish gifts. He bought Victoria a car. He paid for her schooling. He was very generous with his funds.
But not only is Jeffrey robbing the cradle, he's also engaged to another woman, Victoria's older sister, Crystal.
I met Jeffrey Dampier at Arkham skating rink in Chicago, Illinois. So he came up to the side of the rail of the skating rink and he said, "Wow, will you marry me?" I said, "This man must be crazy."
Jeffrey is a man with $1 million smile and an even bigger bank account.
Jeffrey and his ex-wife won the Illinois lottery, and he won $20 million, in which they split it in half and got 10 and 10 apiece.
A jackpot which is being used not only to romance Crystal, but also her little sister.
The relationship started between the two after Jeffrey started dating Crystal and Victoria was brought into the mix, being that she was a sibling.
Victoria was involved in this triangle because it met many of her needs. She had a sugar daddy who took care of her financially, but most importantly, Jeff also played the role of being her father, the father who had tragically killed himself earlier.
If I knew that Jeffrey was having an affair with Victoria, I would have not married him, and I had no clue at all.
After only 1 year of living together, Crystal and Jeffrey get married. And for Crystal's family, it's like hitting a jackpot of their own.
Eventually, he started to support Crystal and her sisters, Victoria and Terry.
2 years into their marriage, the couple moves to Tampa, Florida, to escape the cold of Chicago, and Victoria tags along.
Shortly after moving down to Florida, Victoria moved down, and she stayed with us for about 4 months. I said, well, as long as you're being positive and doing something right for your life, certainly.
Victoria lives the high life, squeezing every penny out of her brother-in-law right under Crystal's nose.
Anything that she needed financially, he gave it to her. And the control that he had was the fact that he had money. And she knew if she needed something, she just had to make one phone call.
Soon, Victoria and Crystal aren't the only Jackson women benefiting from Jeffrey's Midas touch.
Jeffrey moved their sister, Terry, to Florida.
For the next 3 years, Jeffrey ponies up to Crystal's younger siblings' every need without complaint. And by all accounts, Crystal remains clueless about the affair. She's still Jeffrey's happy wife.
I did not know who she was seeing.
Honey, I'm home.
I really can't say that I seen any difference, but the household was running normally.
But Victoria eventually grows tired of playing second fiddle and gives Jeffrey an ultimatum.
Vicky was very naive when she thought that Jeffrey would leave his wife and marry her. This is classic textbook. Quite often, husbands rarely leave their wives for the mistresses. After all, a lot of them think, why buy the cow when you can get the milk for free?
Tired of only being used for sex, Victoria tells Jeffrey she needs some space.
Jeffrey purchased Victoria an apartment, Victoria was trying to distance herself or wean herself away from Jeffrey. Jeffrey was paying for the apartment, so she was still under his control. He continued to control her through his funds.
Oh yeah, I remember.
Victoria rebels against Jeffrey by looking for other fish in the sea, and she is soon catching up with an old flame.
You haven't changed a bit.
Nathaniel Jackson.
Still know the exact things to say.
Victoria knew Nathaniel because they dated each other off and on for about 1.5 years when they both lived in Chicago.
Victoria never really lost touch when she moved to Florida, and they quickly jumped back into a routine of talking and flirting.
Yeah, I know. You should come see me.
The age difference between Nathaniel and Victoria was about 2 years.
She wanted more from somebody and wasn't getting everything she wanted from Jeffrey. He had several arrests for drug possession, for an aggravated assault, some other traffic charges. He had a lengthy criminal history from Illinois.
And Nathaniel's renewed interest in Victoria is no accident.
Nathaniel had some charges associated with money, and here he is now calling Victoria, who he knows is in a relationship with a man who is wealthy.
Nathaniel only has one thing on his mind. And he knows Victoria's lover is loaded, so he suggests the two move in together, and she gladly accepts.
Nathaniel was with Victoria not so much out of love, but because he knew that she had access to Jeffrey's money. So for him, it was about the Benjamins. For Victoria, she was just happy to have a man by her side, having that warm body to keep her company.
Any of the money that Victoria received from Jeffrey, they would spend it together. This was money being given to him by Jeff, so Nathaniel was basically being supported by him.
It doesn't take long before Jeffrey finds out about it. Blinded by jealousy, he threatens to cut Victoria off. Jeffrey then goes to his wife with his intention, and a made-up reason to go with it.
We had a conversation regarding giving, and it was more or less he was getting frustrated because everybody was asking, and he felt like the money bag at that time. I told him, don't give it to my sisters. Don't give it to Victoria or Terry if they ask, unless it's life or death.
The sisters are less than pleased with the new arrangement, and they're not the only ones.
They were upset, but when Nathaniel found out about it, he was furious. If Jeffrey cut off Victoria, they cut him off. That was not going to fly.
Now Victoria has to make a choice to stand by her man. But which one will it be? She's about to be forced into a deadly show of loyalty that will cost one of her men his life.
He is pleading for his life, pleading with Victoria not to shoot him, not to shoot.
In Tampa, Florida, 5 years into their illicit affair, 23-year-old Victoria Jackson's sugar daddy and brother-in-law cuts her off when he finds out about her live-in boyfriend, Nathaniel Jackson.
If Jeffrey cut off Victoria, they cut him off. And Nathaniel was not going to live with that. That was not going to fly.
Call him up and get him over here.
Victoria's loyalty now lies with Nathaniel. If Victoria can't have Jeffrey's love, then she and Nathaniel will have his money. The plot is set into motion.
Good. You always make time for me. Cannot wait to see you. See you soon.
Jerry was at the apartment.
All right. Bye.
And Victoria called Jeffrey and asked him to come over to the house to drop off some boxing tickets.
Victoria leads Jeffrey into the kitchen where Nathaniel attacks.
Where's the money at, huh?
Hearing the commotion, Victoria's sister, Terry, comes out to see what's going on.
They started demanding money, searching his pockets. It's a pretty scary situation.
Jeffrey was carrying a wad of cash, so they took about $7 grand off of him.
Victoria looks on as Nathaniel threatens Jeffrey.
I need you to find me more money or I'm gonna shoot you.
Victoria is caught between her lover and her boyfriend. Victoria disassociated herself from the moment.
Jeffrey has been relieved of his cash, but Nathaniel isn't finished with him yet.
Jeffrey was tied up and they walked him down to his van.
Nathaniel forces the sisters and Jeffrey into the van and leads them on a ride to hell.
Victoria was ordered to drive.
Drive now. Hurry up.
That Victoria took some sort of revenge against Jeffrey was that he had promised to marry her and instead appeared to be leading her on. So when Nathaniel came up with his plan of robbing Jeffrey, Victoria went along with it.
So when Nathaniel orders Victoria to drive to the location of one of his business ventures where he plans to empty the safe, she complies. But Jeffrey throws a wrench into Nathaniel's scheme.
I don't have any money in the safe in the shop.
Jeffrey told them that there was no money in the safe. Nathaniel got upset.
Pull over now. Pull over!
Victoria was listening to Nathaniel. Whatever Nathaniel tells her, she does it.
And Nathaniel is about to tell her to do the unthinkable.
Shoot him. Shoot him, Vicky, shoot him.
Nathaniel now hands the gun to Victoria and tells her to hold the gun on Jeffrey.
Come on!
Nathaniel turns the stereo up in the van and then starts to yell at Victoria.
Shoot him!
Vicky, shoot him. Repeats himself over and over again.
Shoot him!
At this moment, one can only imagine what was all going through Victoria's head.
Do it!
Victoria's boyfriend was demanding her to put a bullet in her lover's head.
Victoria has a choice to make for her man.
Come on, baby.
Whichever that may be.
Now, think about this.
Victoria then grasps the gun with both hands.
She put both her hands on the gun, closed her eyes, turned away, and fired.
Not only did Jeffrey vow to leave Crystal, he actually proposed marriage to Victoria.
He had promised that he would leave his wife, Crystal, to marry Victoria, and he didn't deliver. And that left her feeling very angry, very disappointed, not just in Jeff, but herself.
It's a hot summer night in Tampa, Florida, and Victoria Jackson has just been ordered by one man she loves
Shoot him.
to take the life of another.
Come on, baby.
This whole incident was supposed to simply be a robbery.
At Nathaniel's command, Victoria closes her eyes and makes a deadly choice.
Right into the back of Jeffrey's head.
Jeffrey dies instantly.
Victoria faced a horrible decision. She could have stopped this at any moment. She had that option, but instead, she decided to follow the commands of her boyfriend.
After Victoria shot Jeffrey, all three jumped out and ran separate ways.
At 9:30 p.m., a neighbor discovers the car still running with Jeffrey's dead body inside and calls 911.
911, what's your emergency?
We have a homicide. A van has been abandoned here, like literally just a few minutes ago. And neighbor saw 3 kids get out of the car and take off, and there is a dead body in the car. It's still running.
Deputies from the Tampa Police Department respond to the scene and are alerted to a suspicious woman in the area.
Terry is actually found along the main roadway, waving cars down, trying to get a ride. One of the deputies were able to detain her for further questioning.
Victoria and Nathaniel managed to get a cab to take them to Jacksonville, 170 miles northeast of Tampa. Back at the station, Terry tells police what happened and says she's a victim.
Hurry up, quick. Shoot him, Victor.
She's in the back of the van, has no idea what's going on. She got kidnapped too. We put warrants out for the arrest for Nathaniel and Victoria. At this point, we notified the media, and their story was highlighted on several news outlets in the area.
2 days later, Victoria and Nathaniel are arrested without incident at the home of a friend in Jacksonville.
Nathaniel had $1,500 of the money that he took from Jeffrey, and the money had bloodstains on it.
Once in custody, Victoria is stunned to learn that the man she killed her lover for is selling her out.
You might want to ask his girlfriend, Victoria.
Your boyfriend told us that it was your idea to rob him and to also shoot him.
I think that Victoria thought that Nathaniel would have protected her, and all would have been well.
When police tell Victoria Nathaniel's setting her up to take the fall, she gives a full confession of what happened.
I was told earlier today to call him to see if I can get him to come over.
Okay. And who told you to do that?
Nathaniel Jackson.
Okay. And why did he want him to come over?
To get some money from him, rob him. He started yelling, Vicky, do it, Vicky, do it. And I just closed my eyes and turned my head and pulled the trigger.
When police allow Victoria to confront Nathaniel, he breaks down and confesses to everything.
So be it. So be it.
A few hours later, police deliver the devastating news to Jeffrey's wife, Crystal.
They come in. They told me that he was shot and killed.
I'm sorry.
No! At the time, I lost it. And the kids heard me, and then they came out, so the house got up and roared.
Already devastated, Crystal is dealt one more cruel blow when she's told the identity of her husband's murderer.
My first thoughts when I found out Victoria was involved, I was taken back. I was really confused. How could you kill someone who you were benefiting from? So I don't understand, how could you? So, no.
Crystal's suffering increases when she finds out about the affair.
I was really shocked. They started naming items, a ring, places where they supposed to went to. I just lost it because I didn't see it.
He filled a void in her life, and that need superseded the loyalty that she should have had to her sister.
Police charge Victoria and Nathaniel with the murder and kidnapping of Jeffrey Dampier, and a jury shows no mercy.
Victoria was given 3 life sentences for kidnapping, armed robbery, murder, and Nathaniel was convicted of the same.
Jeffrey really took the best years of her life, the early years, the formative years of her life. So when Nathaniel came along and offered a chance of revenge against Jeff, well, Victoria jumped at it because finally she could tell him and act out her anger with Jeff.
Crystal's sister Terry has never been charged with the crime. Destined to die behind bars, Victoria's days are a constant reminder of her brutal betrayal of one love for another.
don't know if she's truly forgiven herself for what she's done, but I do know that she's facing it every day in a decision and a choice that she made.
So for
The scorching desert heat of Phoenix in the summer of 1985 did not just bake the valley's arid dirt. It acted as a crucible for a terrifying, unholy secret that would remain frozen beneath the dust for over 4 decades. In July of that year, amidst the rapidly expanding suburbs, swimming pools, and palm-lined avenues of a booming Sun Belt metropolis, a brilliant 22-year-old medical student named Nicholas Vance vanished into thin air without leaving a single trace behind. Nicholas was the golden boy of the community, a straight-A student, an athlete, and a young man with a pristine, limitless future that was violently cut short on a Friday night that began with an ordinary family dinner. His car, a pristine vintage convertible, was discovered 48 hours later idling on an isolated access road weaving deep into the Superstition Mountains, the headlights cutting uselessly through the pitch-black desert night, the driver's side door flung wide open, and his wallet still sitting untouched on the dashboard. For 41 agonizing years, this case stood as a legendary, deeply frustrating cold case within the Phoenix Police Department, a dark, impenetrable wall of silence that haunted a shattered family and left a tight-knit community paralyzed by a lingering, toxic sense of dread. Generations of seasoned homicide investigators inherited the brittle manila folder, chasing anonymous letters, digging up remote desert graves, and following erratic, dead-end leads that led absolutely nowhere, leaving the mystery of the vanishing medical student completely open to the elements. But the past has a terrifying, unyielding way of refusing to stay buried, and the ultimate, earth-shattering breakthrough would not come from a sudden deathbed confession or a classic forensic fingerprint match. Instead, it would be detonated by the emergence of cutting-edge genetic genealogy, a revolutionary investigative science that systematically mapped out the phantom killer's exact bloodline, leading straight to a jaw-dropping, community-shattering arrest that would instantly unmask a monster hiding in the plainest sight. The cuffs did not close around the wrists of a transient drifter or a known cartel enforcer. They snapped shut around Nicholas's identical twin brother, an untouchable, revered local physician whose entire life had been a meticulous, 40-year lie built on top of his brother's forgotten grave. The original disappearance of Nicholas Vance back in July 1985 triggered a massive, high-stakes manhunt that immediately collided with an impenetrable wall of environmental chaos, lost data, and deeply confusing familial dynamics. The night he vanished, a historic monsoon storm had ripped through the Phoenix Valley, unleashing a blinding torrent of rain, flash floods, and howling dust storms that effectively scrubbed the primary crime scene of all vital physical metrics within minutes. Patrol officers who located the idling vehicle on the desert mountain road found themselves walking through a forensic void, as the rushing waters had completely washed away any potential tire tracks, boot prints, or biological materials that could have pointed toward the mechanics of a tactical ambush. Nicholas's identical twin brother, Nathan Vance, was the last person to see him alive, telling detectives at the time that Nicholas had left the family home in a state of sudden, intense agitation after receiving a mysterious, low-whisper phone call from an unnamed individual. Nathan appeared completely devastated, throwing himself entirely into the search efforts, leading search parties through the jagged desert canyons, sobbing before television cameras, and pleading directly with the faceless abductors to return his brother unharmed. The community wrapped its arms around the grieving twin, watching in deep empathy as he channeled his profound sorrow into his studies, eventually inheriting his missing brother's dream of becoming a medical doctor, opening a prestigious practice in the valley, and dedicating his entire career to saving local lives. As the years blended into decades, the initial media frenzy completely evaporated from the headlines, and the investigation into the Vance disappearance ground to a devastating, highly frustrating halt, stymied by a complete lack of cooperative witnesses and a total absence of a physical body. Detective Frank Miller, the lead investigator who dedicated his entire career to breaking the case before his retirement in the early 2000s, noted in his personal journals that something about the family's domestic ecosystem felt subtly wrong, a low-frequency vibration of hidden hostility that he could never explicitly prove. Every single lead the police followed turned out to be a carefully constructed dead end, almost as if the killer possessed an intimate, insider knowledge of police protocols and was systematically leading the task force in circles to burn through their operational budget. The case file grew yellow, brittle, and packed with dust, stored away in a cardboard box labeled Cold Case 85-0992 in the deep subterranean archives of the police headquarters, a silent monument to a failure that a broken mother carried to her early grave. The town eventually moved on, building new subdivisions over the old desert access roads, entirely unaware that the grand architect of their community health system was a man who woke up every single morning looking directly into the face of the boy he had brutally destroyed. The silence that blanketed the Phoenix Valley was expensive, meticulous, and total, a 40-year run of flawless criminal immunity that Dr. Nathan Vance guarded with a fierce, absolute control over his public reputation. He became a pillar of the Arizona establishment, a wealthy philanthropist who funded pediatric wings, sat on prestigious medical boards, and married into an old-money political family, his dark past hidden beneath layers of public relations, pristine tailored suits, and a carefully managed aura of professional excellence. But science is an unyielding, unemotional prosecutor, and the genetic markers we leave behind in our moments of violent panic remain entirely patient, waiting for the technology of the future to decipher their true, lethal identity. In the spring of 2026, a newly funded, hyper-focused federal cold case unit took a completely renewed, technologically aggressive look at the preserved physical evidence from the 1985 convertible, focusing on a single, microscopic item that had been written off for decades as an unidentifiable artifact of the monsoon storm. Deep within the tight plastic fibers of the car's safety belt buckle, modern forensic technicians utilizing vacuum-assisted DNA collection successfully extracted a microscopic, pristine sample of dried blood cells that had been shielded from the desert heat for 41 long years. The laboratory technicians subjected the biological sample to advanced next-generation sequencing, generating a high-definition genetic profile of an unknown male individual who had clearly bled inside Nicholas's car during a violent, frantic struggle on the night of the disappearance. When this pristine profile was uploaded into the National Forensic and Commercial Genetic Genealogy databases, the algorithms did not return a match for a known criminal offender. Instead, they flagged a massive, undeniable genetic anomaly that left the forensic genealogists in a state of absolute, paralyzed shock. The DNA from the 41-year-old crime scene was an exact, absolute genotypic match to a prominent, highly respected local figure who had recently submitted his DNA to a genealogical health database for standard heritage tracking, Dr. Nathan Vance. Because identical twins share the exact same broad DNA structure, a standard, antiquated forensic test would have been completely unable to differentiate between the two brothers, a biological loophole that Nathan had confidently relied upon for his entire adult life. But modern, cutting-edge epigenetic sequencing and deep-dive SNP analysis can identify the subtle, microscopic differences in cellular degradation caused by lifestyle, environment, and aging, proving with an astronomical mathematical certainty that the blood left on that seatbelt belonged to the surviving twin, not the victim. The tactical plan for the arrest of Dr. Nathan Vance was executed with an aggressive, direct force that sent an immediate, paralyzing shockwave through the highest echelons of Phoenix society, shattering the peaceful morning routine of a wealthy medical plaza. On a bright Tuesday morning, as the revered physician stepped out of his luxury sports car in the private parking garage of his medical center, carrying his leather briefcase and an imported espresso, he was quietly, efficiently surrounded by 6 plainclothes federal marshals and seasoned detectives from the cold case squad. There were no flashing sirens or shouting megaphones. The lead detective simply stepped into his path, identified himself, and read the warrant for the first-degree murder of Nicholas Vance executed in July 1985. The reaction from the 73-year-old doctor was not an outburst of righteous anger or a demand for his legal counsel. His face drained of all color, his hands began to tremble with a violent, uncontrollable spasticity, and he let out a long, shuddering sigh of absolute, exhausting defeat, as if a heavy, crushing weight had suddenly been lifted from his soul. The news of the arrest spread across digital networks like a wildfire, the media instantly screaming the Chandong headlines to millions of stunned citizens. Phoenix 1985 cold case solved. Twin brothers arrest stuns town. The public's initial reaction was a chaotic mixture of profound disbelief, collective shock, and immense political panic as hospital boards, charitable foundations, and high society families scrambled desperately to cut all ties with a man who had been exposed as a calculating fratricide. How could a beloved community healer, a man who had spent 4 decades treating the sick and comforting the dying, be connected to a brutal, forgotten desert execution from the grimy era of the 80s? While the media circus intensified outside the federal courthouse, investigators were already deep inside the interrogation rooms of one police plaza, confronting the old doctor with the unyielding, absolute precision of the modern epigenetic data. Nathan sat in total silence for the first 4 hours of the questioning, his blank eyes staring fixedly at the steel table, his mind desperately searching for a legal loophole that his millions of dollars could buy. But when the district attorney laid out the color-coded genetic charts, proving that science could now see past the twin anomaly to identify his specific blood cells on the murder vehicle's seatbelt, the old man's psychological defense completely dissolved into ash. In a continuous, emotional torrent of words that left the interrogation team in a state of grim, breathless silence, Dr. Nathan Vance finally began to unburden his soul of the monster he had carried inside for 41 winter cycles. He took the detectives back to the boiling hot summer night of July 12, 1985, describing a toxic, deep-seated reality of intense sibling rivalry, boiling resentment, and psychological manipulation that had been completely hidden behind the family's picture-perfect, middle-class facade. Nicholas had always been the golden child, the twin who effortlessly achieved the highest grades, won the athletic awards, and secured the unconditional love of their demanding parents, leaving Nathan to live in his permanent, suffocating shadow. The breaking point arrived when Nathan discovered that Nicholas had uncovered a dark, highly illegal scheme where Nathan was systematically stealing prescription narcotics from a local clinic to fund a reckless gambling habit. Nicholas had given his twin an ultimatum, telling him that he was going to expose the theft to the medical board the following morning, a revelation that would have resulted in Nathan's immediate ruin, expulsion from school, and permanent disgrace. The ultimatum triggered a sudden, narcissistic rage within Nathan, who decided that the only way to save his own future was to permanently, violently eliminate his identical mirror image from the canvas of reality. He arranged to meet Nicholas on the isolated desert access road near the Superstition Mountains under the pretense of handing over the stolen narcotics for destruction, driving out into the darkness just as the historic monsoon storm began to lash the valley with blinding rain and dust. When Nicholas stepped out of his car, a violent, desperate struggle ensued on the wet dirt road, with Nathan utilizing a heavy, blunt force iron tool from his trunk to strike his twin repeatedly from behind, fracturing his skull with immense physical force. Nathan then dragged the bleeding body of his brother into the trunk of his own vehicle, leaving Nicholas's car idling with the lights on to create the perfect, misleading illusion of a spontaneous carjacking or a random abduction by a transient predator. He drove deep into an uncharted, treacherous canyon sector of the Superstition Mountains, burying the golden boy in a shallow, unmarked desert grave beneath layers of jagged rocks and burning sand, confident that the shifting desert terrain and the torrential rains would keep his unholy secret safe forever. The physical verification of Nathan's confession became the next, deeply emotional focal point of the task force's efforts, as a massive recovery convoy consisting of forensic anthropologists, geological radar specialists, and K-9 tracking units descended upon the rugged wilderness of the Superstition Mountains. The area was cordoned off from the press under a strict operational blackout, the silence of the desert canyons broken only by the rhythmic, heavy hum of specialized excavation equipment cutting through layers of sun-baked caliche and compacted earth. For 3 days, the team worked through the oppressive Arizona heat, guided by the old doctor's fading geographical memories and modern satellite mapping data that reconstructed what the canyon topography looked like back in the summer of 1985. On the fourth morning of the grueling search, deep within a hidden, narrow ravine that had been completely cut off from the main trails by decades of flash floods, the ground-penetrating radar flared with a sharp, structural anomaly that caused the team to halt all heavy operations. Working with the painstaking, delicate precision of archaeologists, the forensic technicians slowly brushed away the coarse desert sand, exposing the skeletal remains of Nicholas Vance, still wrapped tightly in the degraded remnants of the vintage denim jacket he was wearing on the night he vanished. The anthropological evaluation of the bones provided an immediate, devastating validation of the confession. The rear of the skull showed clear signs of a massive, catastrophic blunt force trauma that had fractured the bone with terrifying velocity. The discovery of the remains transformed the legendary cold case from a missing persons inquiry into an ironclad, open-and-shut capital murder prosecution, leaving the defense team with absolutely no room to maneuver or construct a plausible alternative narrative. The desert dust, which had held the secret for over 40 years, had finally yielded its evidence, leaving the fallen physician to face the unyielding weight of a past that refused to remain hidden. The formal arraignment of Dr. Nathan Vance was an unprecedented spectacle in the long, storied annals of the Arizona judicial system, transforming the grim, utilitarian halls of the Maricopa County Courthouse into a chaotic battleground of aggressive reporters, medical colleagues, and deeply stunned citizens. The courtroom was packed to its absolute maximum capacity, the air thick with a suffocating, breathless tension as people pushed against the wooden barriers just to catch a brief glimpse of the elite doctor sitting at the defense table in handcuffs. His high-priced legal defense network, consisting of some of the most formidable criminal defense attorneys in the country, immediately launched a ferocious assault on the prosecution's case, attempting to argue that the epigenetic data was an unproven, experimental science that should be ruled inadmissible in a court of law. They offered a staggering $20 million cash bail, secured by Vance's vast medical real estate portfolio, promising the judge that the elderly physician posed absolutely zero flight risk and deserved to await his trial in the comfort of his home, due to his advancing age. But the federal and state prosecutors stood their ground with an unyielding, fierce determination, presenting the court with a narrative of a crime so monstrous and a multi-decade cover-up so extensive that it demanded the total, uncompromising denial of bail regardless of the defendant's immense wealth or social standing. The lead district attorney argued with piercing clarity that Vance possessed the financial liquidity and international connections to easily escape American justice, fully capable of fleeing the country even at 73 years old. The judge, visibly moved by the sheer severity of the forensic evidence pulled from the desert grave and the historic, systemic deception of the case, denied bail entirely, remanding Dr. Nathan Vance directly to a high-security medical wing at the 4th Avenue Jail. This harsh fortress of concrete and iron was a universe away from his luxury Paradise Valley mansion, a stark reality that signaled to the entire community that the old rules of privilege had been permanently shattered. The trial of Dr. Nathan Vance commenced in the blazing summer of 2026, drawing an unprecedented global digital audience as live television cameras were officially permitted into the historic courtroom, capturing a modern city confronting its oldest, darkest ghost story. The state prosecution opened its monumental case with a devastatingly minimalist, high-impact presentation, displaying a massive photograph of a smiling, 22-year-old Nicholas Vance directly alongside the modern, high-definition microscopic scans of the recovered epigenetic sequencing gels. The lead prosecutor walked the 12 selected jurors through the precise, terrifying timeline of the original 1985 execution with a cold, clinical precision, letting the scientific data speak for itself while systematically stripping away the glamour, prestige, and humanitarian mystique that had surrounded the wealthy doctor for his entire public life. The prosecution called elite forensic experts who explained the astronomical mathematical certainty of the genetic analysis, demonstrating to the jury how lifestyle-induced methylation patterns on the DNA strands proved with absolute clarity that the blood left on the seatbelt belonged to the surviving twin, not the victim. The defense attorneys, fully realizing that they could not defeat the absolute forensic reality of the genetic data, shifted their strategy to an aggressive, desperate attack focused entirely on casting doubt on the mental competence of the defendant and the integrity of his confession. They brought in high-priced psychiatric consultants who attempted to argue that Nathan was suffering from a late-stage, age-related cognitive decline, suggesting that his confession was the result of a fractured mind succumbing to the intense pressure of a coercive police interrogation. They claimed that the old doctor had spent 40 years carrying an intense, irrational survivor's guilt over his twins' disappearance, a psychological trauma that had eventually corrupted his actual memories until he mistakenly believed he was the killer. But the prosecution countered this medical defense with devastating, surgical efficacy, presenting hours of unedited, crystal-clear video footage from the interrogation room that showed Nathan describing the specific, unpublicized coordinates of the burial site and the exact nature of the weapon with absolute clarity and precision. The emotional climax of the entire proceeding occurred when the prosecution introduced the physical items recovered from the desert grave, including a small, silver medical emblem that Nicholas had received from his parents on the morning of his disappearance, an emblem that Nathan had buried alongside his brother's body as a final, twisted act of ritualistic closure. The courtroom was dead silent during this presentation, the only audible sound being the soft weeping of ordinary citizens in the gallery, confronted directly with the raw, horrifying human cost of the twins' 40-year lie. The jury deliberated for less than 3 hours before returning a unanimous verdict of guilty on all counts of first-degree murder and kidnapping, bringing a swift, decisive end to a multi-decade run of criminal immunity. The judge sentenced Dr. Nathan Vance to life imprisonment without the absolute possibility of parole, delivering a scathing rebuke that echoed through the entire state, declaring that his entire life of medical service had been nothing more than a grotesque, hollow performance designed to escape the judgment of the law. In the immediate aftermath of the historic verdict, the city of Phoenix underwent a profound process of collective reflection, turning its public attention entirely away from the monster who had committed the crime and focusing instead on honoring the memory of the young medical student who had been erased from history. The University Medical Center where Nicholas had been enrolled announced the creation of a permanent, full-tuition endowment in his name, explicitly dedicated to supporting talented students from working-class backgrounds who possessed the same fierce moral clarity and passion for healing that he had embodied. The name Vance was permanently, aggressively erased from the walls of the pediatric wings, the medical plaza, and the charitable foundations that Nathan had funded, a total cleansing of a legacy built on top of a dark, generational secret. The successful prosecution proved to the entire nation that no case is truly dead as long as science possesses the patience to read the language of the dead, and that the passage of time can never diminish the unyielding, absolute demands of human justice. The original disappearance of Nicholas Vance back in July 1985 triggered a massive, high-stakes manhunt that immediately collided with an impenetrable wall of environmental chaos, lost data, and deeply confusing familial dynamics that baffled the responding authorities from day one. The night he vanished, a historic, record-breaking monsoon storm had ripped through the Valley of the Sun, unleashing a blinding torrent of rain, devastating flash floods, and howling dust storms that effectively scrubbed the primary desert crime scene of all vital physical metrics within minutes of the abduction. Patrol officers who first located the idling vintage convertible on the desolate mountain access road found themselves walking through a complete forensic void, as the rushing waters had completely washed away any potential tire tracks, boot prints, or biological materials that could have pointed toward the mechanics of a tactical ambush. Nicholas's identical twin brother, Nathan Vance, was recorded as the last known person to see him alive, telling detectives at the time that Nicholas had left the family home in a state of sudden, intense agitation after receiving a mysterious, low-whisper phone call from an unnamed individual. Nathan appeared completely devastated by the tragedy, throwing himself entirely into the subsequent search efforts, leading frantic search parties through the jagged desert canyons, sobbing uncontrollably before television cameras, and pleading directly with the faceless abductors to return his beloved brother unharmed. The community wrapped its arms around the grieving twin, watching in deep empathy as he channeled his profound sorrow into his studies, eventually inheriting his missing brother's dream of becoming a medical doctor, opening a prestigious practice in the valley, and dedicating his entire career to saving local lives. The illusion of solidarity was maintained with absolute perfection, but beneath the surface of the town's collective grief, the early days of the investigation were marked by an underlying current of frustration, institutional incompetence, and overlooked anomalies that would haunt the file for decades. The local police department, overwhelmed by the rapid population growth of the Phoenix metro area in mid-1980s, lacked the specialized training and technological infrastructure to process a high-profile disappearance without a physical body or clear physical clues. The initial search warrants for Nicholas's personal belongings and bank records yielded absolutely nothing unusual, as his digital trail simply ceased to exist at the exact moment the monsoon storm hit the valley. Detective Frank Rossi, the primary investigator assigned to the case, noted in his initial typewritten logs that the family dynamics within the Vance household felt strangely engineered, almost as if every emotional reaction had been rehearsed prior to the arrival of the police. Yet, without a shred of physical evidence to contradict Nathan's timeline or suggest foul play within the domestic sphere, the authorities were forced to treat the case as a random, predatory carjacking gone wrong, an anonymous tragedy swallowed by the shifting desert sands. The true nature of the tragedy was systematically suppressed by the passage of time, the rapid expansion of the suburban landscape, and the complete institutional exhaustion of the local homicide unit, which saw the Vance file grow colder with each passing winter cycle. The vintage convertible was eventually moved to a dusty police impound lot, its interior stripped of its immediate relevance, its leather seats cracking under the relentless Arizona sun while the original detectives retired one by one, carrying the unsolved enigma like a quiet curse into their personal lives. Nathan Vance, meanwhile, operated with the absolute, unshakable confidence of a predator who had successfully navigated the legal system, using his identical genetic makeup as a natural, biological shield that no contemporary forensic science could ever pierce. He understood that in 1985, the legal system was entirely dependent on primitive blood typing and fingerprint analysis, tools that were completely useless when trying to differentiate between two individuals who shared the exact same genetic blueprint. By stepping into his brother's professional shoes and assuming the role of the surviving, duty-bound son, Nathan didn't just escape the suspicion of the law, he captured the unconditional admiration of the very community that should have been hunting him down. The psychological toll of this performance must have been monumental, yet Nathan wore his mask of professional excellence with a terrifyingly fluid grace, building a multi-million-dollar medical empire on the very foundation of his brother's stolen future. He became the chief of surgery at a major regional hospital, a political donor whose endorsement was highly coveted by local magistrates, and a celebrated family man whose pristine reputation was fiercely protected by high-priced public relations firms and an inner circle of elite legal advisors. He spoke frequently at medical conferences about the fragility of life and the moral imperative of the healer, his eloquent words serving as an invisible, impenetrable fortress that kept the dark reality of that July night permanently buried in the past. To the world, Dr. Nathan Vance was a living monument to human resilience, a man who had stared into the void of an unthinkable family tragedy and emerged as a beacon of light for the entire state, entirely safe in his belief that the desert would hold onto his secret until the end of time. But history is not a static document that can be permanently redacted by the wealthy and powerful. It is a living, breathing ledger that remains remarkably patient, waiting for the arrival of tools sophisticated enough to read the microscopic data hidden within the margins. The file on Nicholas Vance remained tucked away in a cardboard box in the subterranean vaults of one police plaza, a yellowed artifact of a grittier, less technologically advanced era of law enforcement, but its physical contents remained uncompromised by the passage of 41 years. Every blood swab, every hair fiber, and every scrap of fabric recovered from the vintage convertible had been preserved in sealed plastic bags by property clerks who had long since passed away, their meticulous adherence to storage protocols unwittingly creating a temporal capsule that would eventually dismantle the perfect crime. As the world outside the vault transformed into a hyperdigitized, interconnected network of genetic databases and advanced biochemistry, the biological material trapped within that box was waiting for its day of judgment, a genetic time bomb ticking silently beneath the feet of the city's most respected physician. The turning point arrived in the winter of 2025, when a newly formed, highly specialized federal cold case task force assumed jurisdictional control over the stagnant Vance file, utilizing an investigative methodology that was completely unimaginable to the detectives of 1985. They did not begin by re-interviewing the aging, fading witnesses or tracking down old paper logs. Instead, they went straight to the evidence vault, bypassing the traditional lines of local political influence to subject the physical remnants of the convertible to a comprehensive, high-definition molecular sweep. The team was led by a new generation of forensic specialists who viewed every crime scene not as a collection of visible clues, but as a rich, microscopic landscape of cellular data that could be harvested and deciphered using the vanguard tools of modern genomics. When they applied vacuum-assisted collection devices to the interior mechanics of the seatbelt buckle, they weren't just looking for a random fingerprint. They were digging for the invisible, indelible signature of a killer's panic, a molecular artifact that would finally break the 40-year deadlock and expose the dark truth behind the Valley's favorite success story. The specialized task force's high-definition molecular sweep did not just harvest random cellular debris, it unbared a pristine, deeply trapped biological signature that had spent 41 summer cycles waiting for the evolution of modern genomics. Deep within the internal, metallic locking mechanisms of the vintage convertible's seatbelt buckle, a structural area completely shielded from the degradation of the blistering Phoenix heat, the purging moisture of the monsoon rains, and the superficial cleanings of the vehicle's subsequent owners, the vacuum-assisted collection devices successfully pulled a microscopic concentration of dehydrated, well-preserved blood cells. In 1985, an atmospheric deposit of this minuscule size would have been completely invisible and entirely useless to the primitive, blood-typing methodologies of the era, which required massive, liquid stains to draw even the most basic, inconclusive serological profiles. But under the unyielding, advanced scrutiny of 21st-century forensic biochemistry, this forgotten speck of dried plasma represented a pristine, uncorrupted treasure trove of complete nuclear DNA, ready to be digitized, sequenced, and weaponized by the unyielding machinery of modern federal justice. The recovered biological material was immediately transported under a strict, federal chain of custody to a specialized next-generation sequencing laboratory in Washington, where technicians began the delicate process of amplifying the ancient genetic material using highly advanced polymerase chain reaction techniques. The automated sequencing arrays processed the sample for 72 continuous hours, mapping out the entire, ultra-high-density genomic blueprint of the unknown male individual who had bled inside the vehicle during that violent, frantic struggle on the night of July 12, 1985. When the resulting, uncompressed digital DNA profile was finalized, forensic analysts did not launch a standard, localized query within the traditional law enforcement databases like CODIS, which only contain the genetic markers of convicted, high-profile offenders. Instead, they uploaded the comprehensive genotypic file into the massive, interconnected global networks of commercial genetic genealogy databases, vast digital repositories containing the ancestral records of millions of ordinary citizens who had voluntarily submitted their DNA for family heritage tracking and health risk assessments. The specialized genetic genealogy algorithms process the data with a rapid, blinding velocity, weaving through millions of familial connections, family trees, and generational public records before returning a massive, undeniable statistical anomaly that left the investigative team in a state of absolute, paralyzed shock. The DNA extracted from the 41-year-old desert crime scene was a direct, absolute, and unmistakable genotypic match to Dr. Nathan Vance, the identical twin brother who had built an iconic, multi-million-dollar medical empire on the very foundation of the victim's stolen future. For more than 4 decades, Nathan had walked the streets of Paradise Valley with the absolute, arrogant certainty of a criminal who possessed a natural, biological shield that no contemporary forensic science could ever hope to pierce. He understood with perfect, calculating clarity that because identical twins originate from the exact same fertilized egg, they share an identical, broad DNA sequence across standard, antiquated forensic tests, a biological loophole that allowed him to confidently assume his brother's professional destiny without fear of legal exposure. What the brilliant surgeon failed to anticipate was that the science of the future would look far past the static, basic structure of the traditional genetic code to explore the highly specialized, dynamic realm of advanced epigenetic sequencing and deep-dive single nucleotide polymorphism analysis. While identical twins do share the exact same foundational DNA sequence, their bodies accumulate distinct, microscopic molecular modifications over their lifetimes, known as DNA methylation patterns, which are directly altered by individual environment, specific lifestyle choices, chronic stress, diet, and the natural, physiological process of aging. The Federal Cyberforensics Unit utilized these vanguard epigenetic markers to analyze the cellular age and distinct lifestyle signatures trapped within the 1985 blood sample, comparing them directly against a recent, verified reference sample that Dr. Vance had submitted to a commercial health registry for a routine cardiovascular screening. The results of the advanced molecular comparison were absolute, devastating, and entirely irrefutable. The epigenetic methylation age of the blood left on the seatbelt buckle matched the specific, 22-year-old biological profile of Nathan Vance at the exact moment of the crime, completely shattering his multi-decade alibi and leaving him exposed as the primary, cold-blooded orchestrator of his brother's disappearance. The realization that the city's most revered medical humanitarian was a calculating, cold-blooded fratricide tore through the task force headquarters with the explosive force of a Category 5 hurricane, instantly reorienting the entire architecture of the 41-year-old cold case. The investigative focus shifted immediately from an open-ended missing persons search to a high-risk, aggressively managed domestic homicide operation, with federal prosecutors working in total, agonizing isolation to construct an unassailable legal trap before Nathan could catch wind of the forensic breakthrough. They knew that a man of Vance's immense financial stature, deep political connections, and profound institutional influence within the Arizona judiciary could effortlessly suppress a localized warrant or flee the country on a private aircraft if he saw the law approaching even an hour in advance. For 3 intensive, sleepless weeks, the clandestine task force worked around the clock, meticulously mapping out the billionaire doctor's daily routines, financial channels, and private security systems, preparing for a dramatic, surgical strike that would permanently tear away his pristine public mask and force the entire community to confront the terrifying monster that had been leading them for generations. The tactical plan for the arrest of Dr. Nathan Vance was executed with an aggressive, direct force that sent an immediate, paralyzing shockwave through the highest echelons of Phoenix society, shattering the peaceful morning routine of a wealthy medical plaza. On a bright Tuesday morning, as the revered physician stepped out of his luxury sports car in the private parking garage of his medical center, carrying his leather briefcase and an imported espresso, he was quietly, efficiently surrounded by 6 plainclothes federal marshals and seasoned detectives from the cold case squad. There were no flashing sirens or shouting megaphones. The lead detective simply stepped into his path, identified himself, and read the warrant for the first-degree murder of Nicholas Vance executed in July 1985. The reaction from the 73-year-old doctor was not an outburst of righteous anger or a demand for his legal counsel. His face drained of all color, his hands began to tremble with a violent, uncontrollable spasticity, and he let out a long, shuddering sigh of absolute, exhausting defeat, as if a heavy, crushing weight had suddenly been lifted from his soul. The news of the arrest spread across digital networks like a wildfire, the media instantly screaming the Chandong headlines to millions of stunned citizens. Phoenix 1985 cold case solved. Twin brothers arrest stuns town. The public's initial reaction was a chaotic mixture of profound disbelief, collective shock, and immense political panic, as hospital boards, charitable foundations, and high society families scrambled desperately to cut all ties with a man who had been exposed as a calculating fratricide. How could a beloved community healer, a man who had spent 4 decades treating the sick and comforting the dying, be connected to a brutal, forgotten desert execution from the grimy era of the 80s? While the media circus intensified outside the federal courthouse, investigators were already deep inside the interrogation rooms of One Police Plaza, confronting the old doctor with the unyielding, absolute precision of the modern epigenetic data. Nathan sat in total silence for the first 4 hours of the questioning, his blank eyes staring fixedly at the steel table, his mind desperately searching for a legal loophole that his millions of dollars could buy. But when the district attorney laid out the color-coded genetic charts, proving that science could now see past the twin anomaly to identify his specific blood cells on the murder vehicle's seatbelt, the old man's psychological defense completely dissolved into ash. In a continuous, emotional torrent of words that left the interrogation team in a state of grim, breathless silence, Dr. Nathan Vance finally began to unburden his soul of the monster he had carried inside for 41 winter cycles. He took the detectives back to the boiling hot summer night of July 12, 1985, describing a toxic, deep-seated reality of intense sibling rivalry, boiling resentment, and psychological manipulation that had been completely hidden behind the family's picture-perfect, middle-class facade. Nicholas had always been the golden child, the twin who effortlessly achieved the highest grades, won the athletic awards, and secured the unconditional love of their demanding parents, leaving Nathan to live in his permanent, suffocating shadow. The breaking point arrived when Nathan discovered that Nicholas had uncovered a dark, highly illegal scheme where Nathan was systematically stealing prescription narcotics from a local clinic to fund a reckless gambling habit. Nicholas had given his twin an ultimatum, telling him that he was going to expose the theft to the medical board the following morning, a revelation that would have resulted in Nathan's immediate ruin, expulsion from school, and permanent disgrace. The ultimatum triggered a sudden, narcissistic rage within Nathan, who decided that the only way to save his own future was to permanently, violently eliminate his identical mirror image from the canvas of reality. He arranged to meet Nicholas on the isolated desert access road near the Superstition Mountains under the pretense of handing over the stolen narcotics for destruction, driving out into the darkness just as the historic monsoon storm began to lash the valley with blinding rain and dust. When Nicholas stepped out of his car, a violent, desperate struggle ensued on the wet dirt road, with Nathan utilizing a heavy, blunt-force iron tool from his trunk to strike his twin repeatedly from behind, fracturing his skull with immense physical force. Nathan then dragged the bleeding body of his brother into the trunk of his own vehicle, leaving Nicholas's car idling with the lights on to create the perfect, misleading illusion of a spontaneous carjacking or a random abduction by a transient predator. He drove deep into an uncharted, treacherous canyon sector of the Superstition Mountains, burying the golden boy in a shallow, unmarked desert grave beneath layers of jagged rocks and burning sand, confident that the shifting desert terrain and the torrential rains would keep his unholy secret safe forever. The detail with which Nathan recalled the spatial logistics of that distant night sent a collective chill down the spines of the veteran investigators sitting in the room as he described how the strobe-like flashes of desert lightning illuminated his brother's dying face against the wet earth. He admitted that every single tears he shed before the news cameras in 1985 was a calculated, theatrical performance designed to test the efficacy of his mask, a chilling psychological experiment where he discovered that the world will always believe a grieving saint over a silent ghost. He weaponized his community's empathy to fast-track his own ascension, utilizing the intense emotional sympathy of his professors and mentors to secure prestigious residencies that should have belonged to his brother. The entire multi-million-dollar empire he built over the next 40 years was revealed to be a massive, living monument of structural distraction, an elaborate web of public service designed entirely to outrun the shadow of an iron buried deep in the mountain sands. As the late-night hours blurred into the early morning dawn, the prosecution finalized the recording of the confession, sealing the legal fate of the city's most prominent surgeon before his defense attorneys could successfully file their first round of emergency injunctions. The chilling reality of the tape-recorded admission began to leak into the local press rooms, permanently shifting the public narrative from one of tragic mystery to a horrifying exposure of a multi-decade familial deception. The city of Phoenix woke up to a new, terrifying comprehension of the man who held their health system in his hands, He was no longer the resilient son who survived a tragedy, but a calculated executioner who had successfully worn his victim's face for over 40 years, leaving an unhealable scar on the collective consciousness of the entire desert valley. The physical verification of Nathan's confession became the next, deeply emotional focal point of the task force's efforts, as a massive recovery convoy consisting of forensic anthropologists, geological radar specialists, and K-9 tracking units descended upon the rugged wilderness of the Superstition Mountains. The area was cordoned off from the press under a strict operational blackout, the silence of the desert canyons broken only by the rhythmic, heavy hum of specialized excavation equipment cutting through layers of sun-baked caliche and compacted earth. For 3 days, the team worked through the oppressive Arizona heat, guided by the old doctor's fading geographical memories and modern satellite mapping data that reconstructed what the canyon topography looked like back in the summer of 1985. On the 4th morning of the grueling search, deep within a hidden, narrow ravine that had been completely cut off from the main trails by decades of flash floods, the ground-penetrating radar flared with a sharp, structural anomaly that caused the team to halt all heavy operations. Working with the painstaking, delicate precision of archaeologists, the forensic technicians slowly brushed away the coarse desert sand, exposing the skeletal remains of Nicholas Vance, still wrapped tightly in the degraded remnants of the vintage denim jacket he was wearing on the night he vanished. The anthropological evaluation of the bones provided an immediate, devastating validation of the confession. The rear of the skull showed clear signs of a massive, catastrophic blunt force trauma that had fractured the bone with terrifying velocity. The discovery of the remains transformed the legendary cold case from a missing persons inquiry into an ironclad, open-and-shut capital murder prosecution, leaving the defense team with absolutely no room to maneuver or construct a plausible alternative narrative. The desert dust, which had held the secret for over 40 years, had finally yielded its evidence, leaving the fallen physician to face the unyielding weight of a past that refused to remain hidden. The structural recovery of the victim's skeleton was not merely a mechanical extraction of bone. It was a deeply solemn, clinical excavation of an entire family history that had been violently rewritten by a sibling's jealousy. As the sun beat down on the exposed white bones against the dark brown soil, the forensic anthropologists meticulously mapped the position of every fragment, discovering that Nathan had thrown his brother's body face down into the dirt, an act that spoke volumes about the deep-seated contempt and narcissistic rage that fueled the 1985 attack. Trapped beneath the ribcage, investigators found Nicholas's plastic student identification card from the University Medical School, its laminated surface cracked and yellowed by the chemical reactions of the soil, but still clearly bearing the name and the youthful, hopeful face of the boy who never got to be a healer. This small piece of plastic, surviving decades of intense desert heat and seasonal flash floods, acted as a silent witness that immediately identified the remains far before the formal lab testing could be completed. While the forensic team worked in the remote canyon, the news of the discovery leaked to the public, causing a massive, spontaneous gathering of citizens outside the perimeter gates of the mountain park. People who had grown up with the Vance twins, individuals who had been treated by Dr. Nathan Vance, and young medical students who looked up to the family legacy stood together in stunned, absolute silence, watching the white forensic vans slowly wind their way down the mountain roads. The myth of the surviving twin had been completely shattered, replaced by a grotesque reality that left the entire valley feeling a sense of profound betrayal and psychological violation. The community was forced to realize that every charitable gala, every medical milestone, and every public achievement celebrated by Nathan Vance over the past 41 years had been funded and enabled by the silent, hidden execution of his identical brother. The skeletal remains were transported to the Maricopa County Medical Examiner's facility under a heavily armed police escort, where a team of forensic pathologists worked through the night to compile a comprehensive post-mortem report. They verified that the impact fractures on the skull perfectly matched the dimensions and structural weight of the vintage iron tire tool that Nathan had described during his late-night confession at one police plaza. There was no sign of any other trauma, no evidence of animal scavenging, and no foreign objects within the grave, indicating that Nathan had acted completely alone, carrying out the burial with a rapid, terrified efficiency before the storm could clear. The clinical precision of the autopsy report provided the state prosecution with an unassailable piece of primary evidence, stripping the defense of any ability to claim that Nicholas's death was an accidental consequence of a mutual physical struggle or the result of an intervention by an outside third party. As the physical reality of the discovery settled into the court records, the local district attorney officially upgraded the charges against Dr. Nathan Vance to include first-degree capital murder, kidnapping, and tampering with evidence, rendering any future legal maneuvers or public relations counteroffensives completely useless. The ghost of the Superstition Mountains had finally been brought home, and his silent, skeletal testimony was an absolute, unstoppable legal force that no amount of multi-million-dollar influence or corporate power could ever hope to silence. The stage was now set for a historic judicial tribunal, a trial that would not just decide the fate of an old, dying surgeon, but would systematically expose the dark, rotting foundation upon which one of the state's most prominent public legacies had been constructed. The formal arraignment of Dr. Nathan Vance was an unprecedented spectacle in the long, storied annals of the Arizona judicial system, transforming the grim, utilitarian halls of the Maricopa County Courthouse into a chaotic battleground of aggressive reporters, medical colleagues, and deeply stunned citizens. The courtroom was packed to its absolute maximum capacity, the air thick with a suffocating, breathless tension as people pushed against the wooden barriers just to catch a brief glimpse of the elite doctor sitting at the defense table in handcuffs. His high-priced legal defense network, consisting of some of the most formidable criminal defense attorneys in the country, immediately launched a ferocious assault on the prosecution's case, attempting to argue that the epigenetic data was an unproven, experimental science that should be ruled inadmissible in a court of law. They offered a staggering $20 million cash bail, secured by Vance's vast medical real estate portfolio, promising the judge that the elderly physician posed absolutely zero flight risk and deserved to await his trial in the comfort of his home due to his advancing age. But the federal and state prosecutors stood their ground with an unyielding, fierce determination, presenting the court with a narrative of a crime so monstrous and a multi-decade cover-up so extensive that it demanded the total, uncompromising denial of bail regardless of the defendant's immense wealth or social standing. The lead district attorney argued with piercing clarity that Vance possessed the financial liquidity and international connections to easily escape American justice, fully capable of fleeing the country even at 73 years old. The judge, visibly moved by the sheer severity of the forensic evidence pulled from the desert grave and the historic, systemic deception of the case, denied bail entirely, remanding Dr. Nathan Vance directly to a high-security medical wing at the 4th Avenue Jail. This harsh fortress of concrete and iron was a universe away from his luxury Paradise Valley mansion, a stark reality that signaled to the entire community that the old rules of privilege had been permanently shattered. The rejection of bail sent shockwaves pulling through the corporate boardrooms of the Arizona health industry, causing an immediate, catastrophic collapse of the medical empire that Nathan Vance had spent 40 years constructing. Hospital executives, desperate to protect their institutional branding, held emergency late-night sessions to scrub his name from every surgical pavilion, every research grant, and every public monument in the valley, effectively erasing his professional footprint within 48 hours of the arraignment. The state medical board moved with unprecedented velocity, executing a summary suspension of his surgical license while state auditors began frozen asset protocols on his numerous offshore corporate accounts. The pristine, immaculate image of the valley's greatest humanitarian philanthropist had evaporated overnight, replaced by the terrifying, clinical reality of a capital murder defendant whose entire life had been unmasked as a grotesque, calculating performance. Inside the stark confines of his high-security cell, stripped of his custom-tailored suits, his luxury watches, and his legions of obsequious medical assistants, the aging physician began to rapidly age, his aristocratic posture collapsing into a hollow, defeated, slumping posture. His high-priced defense team, Recognizing that the combination of the epigenetic data and the physical recovery of the skeleton was an existential threat to their client's survival, deployed a scorched earth legal campaign designed to delay the trial at all costs. They filed over 50 separate procedural motions, challenging everything from the psychological conditions of the interrogation room to the specific structural calibration of the next-generation sequencing equipment used by the federal laboratory. They claimed that the old doctor's confession was a product of severe psychological duress, a temporary mental break engineered by predatory detectives who weaponized a 40-year-old family trauma to break an elderly man's mind. But the machinery of justice, once properly aligned by the weight of scientific truth, moves with an unyielding momentum that completely ignores the theatrical delays of corporate litigators. The prosecution countered every single defense motion with an insurmountable wall of corroborating data, introducing independent expert testimony from global leaders in molecular biochemistry who verified that the epigenetic methylation sequencing left no room for rational doubt. They proved that the unique chemical anomalies of the blood found inside the convertible could only belong to Nathan Vance at the age of 22, entirely dismantling the defense team's theories of secondary transfer or lab contamination. The technical reality of the murder was becoming absolute, transforming the abstract desert mystery of 1985 into an ironclad, clinical timeline that promised to systematically destroy the billionaire's legacy when the courtroom doors finally opened for the trial. The trial of Dr. Nathan Vance commenced in the blazing, unforgiving summer heat of 2026, drawing an unprecedented global digital audience as live television cameras were officially permitted into the historic courtroom, capturing a modern city confronting its oldest, darkest ghost story. The state prosecution opened its monumental case with a devastatingly minimalist, high-impact presentation, displaying a massive photograph of a smiling, 22-year-old Nicholas Vance directly alongside the modern, high-definition microscopic scans of the recovered epigenetic sequencing gels. The lead prosecutor walked the 12 selected jurors through the precise, terrifying timeline of the original 1985 execution with a cold, clinical precision, letting the scientific data speak for itself while systematically stripping away the glamour, prestige, and humanitarian mystique that had surrounded the wealthy doctor for his entire public life. The prosecution called elite forensic experts who explained the astronomical mathematical certainty of the genetic analysis, demonstrating to the jury how lifestyle-induced methylation patterns on the DNA strands proved with absolute clarity that the blood left on the seatbelt belonged to the surviving twin, not the victim. The defense attorneys, fully realizing that they could not defeat the absolute forensic reality of the genetic data, shifted their strategy to an aggressive, desperate attack focused entirely on casting doubt on the mental competence of the defendant and the integrity of his confession. They brought in high-priced psychiatric consultants who attempted to argue that Nathan was suffering from a late-stage, age-related cognitive decline, suggesting that his confession was the result of a fractured mind succumbing to the intense pressure of a coercive police interrogation. They claimed that the old doctor had spent 40 years carrying an intense, irrational survivor's guilt over his twin's disappearance, a psychological trauma that had eventually corrupted his actual memories until he mistakenly believed he was the killer. But the prosecution countered this medical defense with devastating, surgical efficacy, presenting hours of unedited, crystal-clear video footage from the interrogation room that showed Nathan describing the specific, unpublicized coordinates of the burial site and the exact nature of the weapon with absolute clarity and precision. The emotional climax of the entire proceeding occurred when the prosecution introduced the physical items recovered from the desert grave, including a small, silver medical emblem that Nicholas had received from his parents on the morning of his disappearance, an emblem that Nathan had buried alongside his brother's body as a final, twisted act of ritualistic closure. The courtroom was dead silent during this presentation, the only audible sound being the soft weeping of ordinary citizens in the gallery, confronted directly with the raw, horrifying human cost of the twins' 40-year lie. The jury deliberated for less than 3 hours before returning a unanimous verdict of guilty on all counts of first-degree murder and kidnapping, bringing a swift, decisive end to a multi-decade run of criminal immunity. The judge sentenced Dr. Nathan Vance to life imprisonment without the absolute possibility of parole, delivering a scathing rebuke that echoed through the entire state, declaring that his entire life of medical service had been nothing more than a grotesque, hollow performance designed to escape the judgment of the law. In the immediate aftermath of the historic verdict, the city of Phoenix underwent a profound process of collective reflection, turning its public attention entirely away from the monster who had committed the crime and focusing instead on honoring the memory of the young medical student who had been erased from history. The University Medical Center where Nicholas had been enrolled announced the creation of a permanent, full-tuition endowment in his name, explicitly dedicated to supporting talented students from working-class backgrounds who possessed the same fierce moral clarity and passion for healing that he had embodied. The name Vance was permanently, aggressively erased from the walls of the pediatric wings, the medical plaza, and the charitable foundations that Nathan had funded, a total cleansing of a legacy built on top of a dark, generational secret. The successful prosecution proved to the entire nation that no case is truly dead as long as science possesses the patience to read the language of the dead, and that the passage of time can never diminish the unyielding, absolute demands of human justice. The courtroom battle had ended, but the shockwaves continued to reverberate through the dry desert air, dismantling the social fabric of an entire generation of Phoenix elites who had championed Nathan Vance as a visionary. The public realization that a man could walk among them, operate on their children, and sit at their dinner tables while harboring the skeletal ghost of his own flesh and blood created a deep, structural paranoia within the community. Investigative journalists began to unearth older records, questioning how many people in the upper echelons of the city's institutions had turned a blind eye to the inconsistencies in Nathan's early life in exchange for political favors and corporate donations. The grand philanthropic legacy that once defined the Vance name was thoroughly dismantled, stripped of its honor, and revealed to be nothing more than a desperate, multi-decade attempt to outrun the silent, unyielding reach of forensic truth. As the summer sun began to set behind the jagged silhouette of the Superstition Mountains, casting long, crimson shadows across the valley, the true weight of the cold case finality settled into the hearts of the citizenry. The memory of Nicholas Vance was no longer trapped in the suffocating darkness of a hidden mountain ravine. His story had been reclaimed, his identity restored, and his stolen future acknowledged by the very community that had spent 40 years celebrating his executioner. The unyielding precision of modern science had broken the perfect crime, proving that no matter how much wealth is accumulated, how many monuments are built, or how much time is allowed to pass, the truth remains an absolute, unstoppable force that will eventually demand its debt in full. The formal finality of the life sentence handed down to Dr. Nathan Vance did not mark a quiet, orderly conclusion to this multi-decade saga. Instead, it ignited a fierce, systemic investigation into the hidden architecture of the massive medical and real estate empire he left behind. The moment the gavel slammed onto the wooden bench inside the Maricopa County Courthouse, a team of court-appointed financial receivers, federal forensic auditors, and state asset protection specialists assumed immediate, absolute control over every single bank account, shell corporation, and medical foundation associated with the Vance name. They were not looking for medical anomalies. They were hunting for the dark financial trails that Nathan had used to maintain his absolute, expensive silence over 41 winter cycles, desperate to uncover how a man could buy total criminal immunity within a modern American metropolis. The initial sweeps of his private electronic ledgers unbarred a sprawling, highly sophisticated network of offshore asset trusts located in the Cayman Islands, Zurich, and Luxembourg, containing tens of millions of dollars in liquid capital that had been systematically hidden from both tax authorities and public scrutiny. As the investigative teams peeled back the corporate layers, they discovered a chilling reality. Parts of this vast fortune were directly generated by exploiting the early medical research, lecture notes, and raw academic breakthroughs that Nicholas Vance had compiled before his life was violently cut short in 1985. Nathan had not only stolen his twin brother's professional identity, he had actively mined his victims' surviving intellectual property to fast-track his own early clinical successes, transforming a brutal act of fratricide into a highly lucrative corporate engine. The public realization of this parasitic theft sent an immediate shockwave of pure disgust through the medical community, causing elite healthcare organizations across the country to launch emergency reviews of any surgical methodology or research paper that bore the tainted name of Dr. Nathan Vance. Every single piece of his professional legacy was now viewed as a stolen commodity, a grotesque artifact of a life built upon a foundation of unpunished violence and structural deception. The financial liquidation process moved with an aggressive, uncompromising velocity as federal magistrates ordered the immediate asset freeze and seizure of Nathan's palatial, multi-million-dollar estate nestled deep within the exclusive canyons of Paradise Valley. This ultra-luxury compound, a fortress of limestone, private swimming pools, and manicured desert gardens that had served as the physical symbol of his immense socioeconomic prestige, was systematically cleared out by federal marshals, its expensive contents cataloged for public auction to fund a massive, historic restitution trust for the surviving victims of his deception. While movers packed away his custom-tailored Italian suits, his rare art collections, and his fleets of high-end sports cars, forensic teams utilized advanced deep-wall scanning equipment within the mansion's private library, discovering a hidden, climate-controlled vault containing a collection of personal journals that Nathan had maintained since the late 1980s. These journals did not contain confessions of medical genius. They were filled with the manic, deeply paranoid rants of a man who spent every single day of his life terrified that a single loose thread would unravel his perfect life. The recovered diaries provided a horrifying, unprecedented window into the psychological prison that Nathan had constructed for himself, detailing the extreme, near-psychotic measures he took to ensure his identical genetic blueprint never crossed paths with a modern forensic testing array. He wrote obsessively about refusing to participate in routine corporate health screenings, details of how he manually intercepted and destroyed his own biological samples at hospital labs, and his deep, paralyzing dread of the rapid development of commercial DNA databases in the early 2010s. He knew with absolute clarity that his biological clock was ticking, that the science of the future was closing in on his secret, and that his wealth was merely buying him a temporary stay of execution against an unyielding molecular adversary. The publication of select, redacted portions of these journals in the local press stripped away the last remaining fragments of his public dignity, exposing the revered chief of surgery not as an untouchable titan of industry, but as a terrified, trembling fugitive who had spent 4 decades running from a ghost in his own mirror. While the financial empire was being systematically dismantled, the local community began an intense, visceral process of reclaiming the physical spaces that Nathan had polluted with his philanthropic branding. Construction crews equipped with heavy machinery descended upon the regional medical center where his name had been emblazoned in giant, brushed steel lettering across the front facade of the main pediatric pavilion. In a dramatic scene captured by local news drones and watched by hundreds of emotional citizens on the ground, workers sliced through the metal mounts, sending the name Nathan Vance crashing into the industrial recycling bins below, completely erasing his visual presence from the institution he had sought to dominate. Cultural foundations, state universities, and high society charitable boards issued formal, public apologies for their decades of uncritical association with the killer, scrambling to return past donations and erase his name from their historical rosters of honor. The total dismantling of the Vance dynasty served as a monumental, chilling lesson to the entire state of Arizona, proving with absolute clarity that the accumulation of extreme wealth, institutional power, and public adulation cannot buy a permanent exemption from the ultimate demands of human law. The man who had once ruled the medical establishment of the valley with an iron hand was now nothing more than an anonymous inmate number within the state's highest security penitentiary, completely stripped of his privileges, his assets, and his freedom. He was forced to spend the remaining days of his natural life staring at the unyielding concrete walls of a high-security medical cell, surrounded only by the suffocating weight of his own conscience and the complete, universal condemnation of the world he had spent 40 years trying to deceive. The cold case file was officially closed, but its profound, lingering resonance would continue to echo through the corridors of power for generations, a timeless reminder that the ultimate boundary of the law is unyielding, and that no secret can remain buried forever when the truth possesses the patience of the earth itself. In the months following the spectacular collapse of the Vance medical dynasty, the legal shockwaves radiated outward from the Maricopa County Courthouse, initiating an unprecedented structural purge within the state's political and judicial institutions. A specialized gubernatorial commission was immediately chartered to audit the historical archives of the local municipal police department and the county prosecutor's office from the mid-1980s, desperate to uncover how a capital murder investigation could have been so effectively derailed for over 4 decades. Independent investigative journalists, armed with Freedom of Information requests and newly unsealed digital internal affairs logs, began publishing a devastating series of front-page exposes detailing a subterranean network of mutual protection, quiet financial favors, and strategic blind spots that had insulated Dr. Nathan Vance from legitimate scrutiny. It was revealed that in the early 1990s, when a rookie detective attempted to formally re-examine the structural integrity of Nathan's original 1985 alibi, high-ranking administrative officials systematically starved the operation of overtime pay, reassigned the investigator to a remote precinct, and locked the primary evidence crate inside an uncatalogued storage vault. The public exposure of this institutional complicity shattered the community's lingering trust in the old guard of the Arizona establishment, triggering the immediate, forced resignation of 3 long-serving municipal judges, a retired police chief, and several prominent corporate lawyers who had routinely accepted massive campaign contributions from the Vance philanthropic trusts. The city was undergoing a deep, visceral moral cleansing, awakening to the horrifying comprehension that the gleaming, modern skyscrapers of the downtown financial center and the exclusive gated communities of Paradise Valley had been built on a foundation of calculated indifference to human life. The local populace, consumed by a mixture of righteous fury and profound betrayal, flooded the city council chambers, demanding the total implementation of sweeping, independent oversight committees to ensure that wealth and high society standing could never again buy an exemption from the criminal justice system. Meanwhile, within the highly secured, sterile environments of the state forensic laboratories, the groundbreaking molecular methodologies that had successfully dismantled Nathan's 40-year lie were being standardized into a revolutionary new operational protocol for unresolved homicides across the United States. The Federal Cold Case Unit announced the launch of the Nicholas Vance Justice Initiative, a fully funded, multi-jurisdictional task force dedicated exclusively to reharvesting microscopic cellular material from thousands of abandoned, stagnating crime scene exhibits using the same vacuum-assisted DNA collection and epigenetic methylation sequencing techniques. Forensic scientists from global institutions descended upon Phoenix to study the unique parameters of the case, marveling at how the cellular lifestyle data trapped within a single, tiny droplet of dehydrated plasma could survive the intense environmental degradation of the Southwest desert to stand as an absolute, irrefutable witness in a court of law. The technological legacy of the Vance case fundamentally re-engineered the modern landscape of death investigations, effectively turning the biological passage of time from a traditional shield for the guilty into an unyielding, dynamic asset for the prosecution. Criminals who had spent decades sleeping soundly in their suburban beds, completely confident that the decomposition of traditional evidence and the death of human witnesses had granted them a permanent, structural immunity, woke up to a new, terrifying reality where their own aging cellular structures were ticking time bombs waiting to betray them to the law. The dry, iron-rich earth of the valley, which had held Nicholas's remains in total obscurity for 41 winter cycles, was no longer seen by investigators as an impenetrable barrier to the truth, but as a silent, archival vault that had perfectly preserved the molecular signatures of a fratricide until the evolution of human science was sophisticated enough to decipher them. As the physical assets of the Vance medical empire were methodically liquidated by court-appointed receivers, an intense legal battle erupted over the final distribution of the tens of millions of dollars recovered from the doctor's complex network of offshore trusts. Federal judges aggressively denied every single corporate injunction filed by Nathan's remaining business partners, ruling that any capital touched or generated by the defendant during his 40-year run of criminal immunity was a direct product of an ongoing, lethal conspiracy against the state and the victim's estate. The court ordered that a massive portion of the liquidated wealth be used to construct a state-of-the-art forensic training academy and a public advocacy center dedicated to assisting the families of missing persons, transforming the physical proceeds of a monster's greed into a permanent, operational weapon designed to hunt down other hidden predators. The physical landscape of the valley continued to shift as the demolition of Nathan's private architectural monuments moved into its final, definitive stages. The sprawling medical plaza that had once stood as the crown jewel of his professional legacy was completely rezoned by city planners, its marble entryways dismantled, its glass facades replaced, and its operational charters transferred to a nonprofit healthcare collective committed to serving the marginalized communities that Nathan had systematically ignored during his rise to power. The memory of the brilliant young medical student who had been discarded in a remote ravine was slowly, meticulously being restored to the public square, his name completely decoupled from the terrifying legacy of his executioner, standing at last as a symbol of unyielding moral clarity and the absolute triumph of forensic truth over the temporary illusions of human power. On a quiet, exceptionally crisp autumn afternoon in October 2026, exactly 41 years to the very day since his life was brutally stolen on that dark, monsoon-swept access road, a small and deeply emotional group of citizens gathered on the serene, rocky slopes of the Superstition Mountains to dedicate a permanent memorial to Nicholas Vance. The weather was remarkably clear, the heavy, suffocating heat of the desert summer having finally broken, replaced by a cool, unyielding mountain breeze that rustled through the massive saguaro cacti and the wild chaparral lining the jagged canyon trails. The monument itself was designed to be a simple, elegant plaza constructed entirely from local Arizona granite and surrounded by a carefully curated garden of native desert flora that bloomed in quiet shades of deep violet, crimson, and gold. Its central, defining feature was a striking, custom-carved bronze sundial that accurately, silently tracked the relentless passage of time across the changing seasons without the need for mechanical gears, electric currents, or digital circuits, permanently symbolizing the eternal patience of forensic truth. The physical placement of the monument was chosen with a meticulous, deeply respectful intentionality, sitting directly on the public border where the wild, untamed wilderness of the mountain park meets the rapidly expanding suburban sprawl of the modern Phoenix Valley. From this elevated vantage point, visitors could look out simultaneously over the pristine, rocky ravines where Nicholas's bones had spent 4 decades waiting in total darkness, and the shimmering, distant glass towers of the city skyline, where his identical twin brother had constructed a multi-million-dollar empire out of his stolen identity. The contrast was absolute, devastating, and profound, a stark, architectural reminder of the twin realities that had coexisted within the valley for 41 years, and a powerful demonstration of how the silent, hidden earth will eventually rise up to demand a full accounting from the highest palaces of human pride. The dedication ceremony proceeded without the theatrical fanfare, flashing cameras, or self-serving speeches that usually characterize the city's high society gatherings, with the organizing committees deliberately barring corporate sponsors, political campaigns, and local dignitaries who had once competed for a seat at Dr. Nathan Vance's charity tables. Instead, the sacred space was occupied entirely by the ordinary, working-class citizens of the valley, the retired police clerks who had protected the evidence box for decades, the young geneticists who had unlocked the epigenetic data from the seatbelt buckle, and the surviving childhood friends who had loved Nicholas before his name was written out of history. They stood together in a dense, respectful circle around the bronze sundial, their faces illuminated by the bright, unyielding desert light, their collective presence creating a powerful, human barrier against the decades of systemic silence, institutional corruption, and calculated indifference that had almost allowed a monster to win. As the afternoon sun began to slowly, dramatically dip behind the jagged silhouette of the western mountains, casting long, amber-colored shadows across the granite stones of the plaza. The lead director of the Federal Cold Case Unit stepped forward to address the gathered crowd. He did not use his time to recount the gruesome details of the 1985 bludgeoning or to waste words on the memory of the disgraced physician who is currently rotting inside a maximum security prison infirmary. Instead, he spoke exclusively of the unyielding, molecular light that had finally shattered the darkness of the perfect crime. He reminded the audience that while human memory is a fragile, easily manipulated instrument that can be bought with philanthropic donations and hidden behind corporate public relations firms, the biological ledger of our actions remains remarkably patient, waiting for the arrival of a science honest enough to read it. For more than 40 years, the powerful institutions of this state accepted a narrative that was built on a foundation of calculated violence and structural deception, entirely content to honor a living saint while ignoring the silent cry of a forgotten ghost. The director stated, his voice carrying across the quiet canyon paths with an intense, calm power that brought visible tears to the eyes of the veteran homicide detectives standing in the back. They believed that if you build enough hospital wings, marry into the right families, and allow enough winter cycles to wash over the soil, you can successfully buy a permanent exemption from the judgments of history and the reach of human law. But they forgot that the earth does not hold onto a lie forever. Nicholas's voice was not extinguished in that ravine. It was encoded inside his own blood cells, waiting silently beneath the dust, counting down the days until the world was mature enough to listen to the language of the dead. Today, we don't just dedicate a plaza. We bury the illusion that wealth can permanently outrun the truth. When the speech concluded, the crowd moved forward one by one to touch the cool bronze rim of the sundial, leaving behind small, deeply personal tokens of remembrance, including vintage medical textbooks, handwritten letters of apology from the city's academic institutions, and small bouquets of wild desert lavender that filled the mountain air with a clean, sharp fragrance. The atmosphere was thick with a profound, unshakable sense of historical vindication and total psychological relief, as if a toxic, low-frequency vibration of fear that had plagued the entire valley for a generation had been permanently purged from the soil. The memory of Nicholas Vance had finally been rescued from the suffocating finality of an anonymous desert grave, his identity restored, his integrity vindicated, and his stolen future fully acknowledged by the very community that had spent decades celebrating his executioner. As the twilight hours faded into a deep, purple desert night, the flickering warmth of dozens of memorial candles began to glow brilliantly against the massive, dark void of the surrounding mountain peaks, leaving the bronze monument standing as a permanent, solitary guardian of the canyon trail. The sundial remained fixed in the stone, an unbreakable boundary line that proved to every future generation of investigators, citizens, and corporate titans that a single drop of unavenged blood can dismantle the largest empire in the state, if given enough time. The dry, iron-rich dirt of the Superstition Mountains, which had once been a canvas of absolute terror on the night of July 12, 1985, had been completely transformed into a sanctuary of civic honor, a timeless, unyielding monument to a truth that can never be bought, never be buried, and never be defeated by the temporary illusions of human power. The final, dark chapter of the Vance family tragedy drew to a sudden, absolute close deep within the sterile, heavily fortified confines of the maximum security medical wing at the Arizona State Penitentiary. On an exceptionally cold, bitter winter morning in December 2026, just 6 months after his historic capital conviction had permanently shattered the social fabric of the Phoenix Valley, inmate number 309822, formerly known to the world as the billionaire humanitarian Dr. Nathan Vance, passed away quietly in his iron prison bed. The man who had spent 41 years sleeping on imported Egyptian cotton sheets beneath the vaulted ceilings of a Paradise Valley mansion drew his final, ragged breaths surrounded only by the low, mechanical hum of a state-issued cardiac monitor and the indifferent, concrete walls of a high-security cell. There were no high-priced defense attorneys pacing the floor, no legacy public relations executives standing guard to spin his final moments, and no tearful, high society colleagues holding his trembling hands. He died entirely alone, trapped inside the absolute, unyielding prison of his own historic choices. The institutional announcement of his death issued by the State Department of Corrections was a masterpiece of cold, administrative minimalism, consuming less than 3 sentences on a standard public press release that listed his passing as a natural consequence of age-related cardiovascular collapse. The media networks that had once dedicated primetime specials to celebrating his brilliant surgical innovations and his multi-million-dollar philanthropic donations treated his death as an aggressive, immediate afterthought, burying the news text beneath the daily sports scores and standard economic updates. The city he had sought to conquer and reshape over a lifetime of calculated deception had simply, universally moved past his existence, refusing to grant his passing a single shred of the public mourning, grand elegies, or historical nostalgia that he had spent his entire adult life trying to secure. He had vanished from the public square not as a fallen titan of industry or a tragic, complicated American icon, but as a clinical footnote, a convicted fratricide whose very name had become an unholy, toxic brand that the entire state was desperately trying to forget. The physical disposal of his remains was carried out with the same silent, rapid efficiency that characterized his final months of absolute legal isolation, as his surviving corporate executors discovered that no prominent cemetery or private mausoleum in the entire state of Arizona would accept his body for burial. Terrified that his proximity would permanently defile their historic grounds and trigger immediate boycotts from wealthy patrons. His body was quietly transported to a utilitarian, county-run crematorium on the industrial fringes of the valley, where his physical form was systematically reduced to ash under a nameless, numbered work order that required absolutely zero religious services or public witnesses. The resulting ashes were delivered in a plain, unmarked plastic container to a distant corporate storage facility, entirely unclaimed by any member of the high society political family he had married into. A total, devastating damnatio memoriae that effectively erased his physical lineage from the face of the earth he had polluted with his secrets. While the physical remnants of the killer were being quietly dissolved into the wind, the massive legal and financial machinery of the Nicholas Vance Justice Initiative completed its final, definitive distribution of his seized international wealth, ensuring that the fruits of his multi-decade deception were systematically weaponized against his memory. The court-appointed receivers finalized the total liquidation of his offshore trusts and real estate holdings, redirecting over $90 million in recovered capital directly into the expansion of the state's forensic research laboratories and the establishment of permanent, independent cold case task forces. The very financial resources that Nathan had accumulated by exploiting his twin brother's early academic breakthroughs were now being used to train a completely new generation of cyberforensic technicians, molecular biologists, and genetic genealogists, turning his stolen fortune into a permanent, highly automated engine designed to hunt down other hidden predators who believed they had outrun the law. The physical site of the Paradise Valley estate, the limestone fortress that had served as the architectural monument to his absolute criminal immunity, was completely demolished by state order, its grand walls pulled down by heavy excavators, its manicured desert gardens plowed under, and the land itself returned to the public domain as an annex for the state park system. The concrete and stone that had held the paranoid diaries and the stolen medical models were crushed into raw gravel, used to pave the very mountain trails that led hikers up toward Nicholas's permanent granite memorial on the slopes of the Superstition Mountains. Every single physical trace of Nathan's arrogance was systematically, thoroughly repurposed by the state, stripped of its ability to project power, and transformed into a humble, functional resource designed to serve the ordinary citizens he had spent 40 years looking down upon from his high palace. High above the transforming valley, where the cool mountain air swept through the deep ravines and the wild chaparral of the desert park, Nicholas Vance's granite plaza stood as the ultimate, unyielding sentinel of the landscape, its bronze sundial catching the pristine, unclouded light of a new Arizona dawn. The monument was no longer visited by crowds of curious true crime enthusiasts or sensationalist camera crews. It had transitioned into a quiet, sacred sanctuary for the working-class families of the region, a timeless geographic marker that proved to every young student, auditor, and investigator that the law is an absolute, living force that cannot be permanently blinded by wealth or social prestige. The memory of the brilliant young medical student who had been brutally discarded in the dark recesses of a hidden ravine was now fully, beautifully woven into the permanent historical identity of the city, his name standing as an eternal symbol of moral resilience and the total, inevitable triumph of forensic science over the temporary illusions of human power. The cold case that had begun on that chaotic, monsoon-swept night of July 12, 1985, had finally achieved its absolute, historical equilibrium, leaving behind an empty throne where a monster had once ruled, and a community that had courageously chosen to face its oldest ghost in pursuit of its own moral salvation. The red desert dust had yielded its secrets, the modern laboratories had deciphered the language of the cellular dead, and the unyielding precision of the molecular ledger had collected its ancient debt in full, proving to the world that no secret can remain buried forever when the truth possesses the absolute patience of the earth itself. Nicholas Vance was finally, truly home, his voice no longer silenced by the walls of a brick quarry or the arrogance of a twin, his spirit resting at last in the clean, free mountain air that blew across the valley he was always meant to heal. The complete dissolution of the Vance estate did not merely signify the end of a corrupt family line. It marked the dawn of a profound, systemic renaissance within the entire framework of American medical legal history. By the spring of 2027, the Nicholas Vance Justice Initiative had evolved from a localized, reactionary task force into a premier, globally recognized institute for advanced forensic genomics, housed within the newly constructed state facility built on the very grounds where Nathan's luxury mansion once stood. This state-of-the-art academy operated as an open, living laboratory where the world's leading molecular biologists, genetic genealogists, and cybercrime specialists gathered to codify the exact methodologies that had broken the 41-year-old cold case. The Institute's primary supercomputing grid, entirely funded by the liquidation of Nathan's offshore Swiss assets, ran continuous, automated algorithms across tens of thousands of neglected, fluid-stained evidence exhibits shipped in from forgotten police property rooms across the country, systematically decoding the ancient genetic codes of unidentified victims and unpunished predators alike. The specific, unyielding technique of epigenetic methylation analysis, the very science that had pierced Nathan's identical twin defense, became the new gold standard for high-stakes criminal prosecutions across the international legal landscape. Defense attorneys could no longer rely on the passage of time, the degradation of traditional nuclear DNA profiles, or the convenient deaths of old eyewitnesses to secure reasonable doubt for their wealthy clients. The cellular clock, as established by the pioneering research in the Vance case, was proved to be an absolute, unbribable archivist that recorded every moment of physical trauma, intense stress, and violent panic directly onto the human genome with the precision of a digital ledger. The legal departments of major universities began introducing mandatory coursework on advanced genomics in criminal law, utilizing the archived trial records of the state of Arizona versus Nathan Vance to demonstrate how a single, microscopic droplet of dried plasma could successfully dismantle a multi-million-dollar corporate empire decades after the crime was committed. Down in the bustling, sun-drenched valley of Phoenix, the generational paranoia that had gripped the local medical establishment during the exposure of the chief surgeon's crimes slowly began to give way to an intense, hyper-vigilant culture of absolute transparency and institutional accountability. The new administrative board of the Regional Medical Center implemented rigorous, independent background verification protocols and biometric tracking systems that made it completely impossible for any medical professional to obfuscate their true identity, genetic profile, or historical credentials. The old money dynasties of Buckhead and Paradise Valley, thoroughly shaken by the public exposure of their complicity in protecting Nathan's early career, systematically withdrew from their traditional, insular patterns of backroom political financing, realizing that the modern digital public square would no longer tolerate the weaponization of philanthropy to hide the stains of historical violence. On the quiet, rocky trails of the Superstition Mountains, the permanent granite memorial to Nicholas Vance remained a timeless, solemn sanctuary of civic honor, unaffected by the changing tides of the city's political leadership or the rapid evolution of the surrounding technological landscape. Every year on the morning of July 12th, the surviving members of the original search teams, accompanied by young medical students who had received the Nicholas Vance Memorial Scholarship, made a silent, rhythmic pilgrimage up the canyon paths to place fresh wreaths of wild desert lavender at the base of the bronze sundial. The monument stood as an unbreakable geographic boundary line against the historical amnesia of the valley, an architectural guarantee that as long as the sun continued to rise over the desert peaks, the name of the brilliant young student who had stood for moral clarity would always shine brighter than the legacy of the man who had tried to erase him. The physical machinery of the modern world continued to hum across the desert landscape, its highways expanding, its skyscrapers reaching higher into the clear blue sky, and its populations shifting with the relentless momentum of a new era. But the invisible framework of the city was fundamentally, permanently altered. It was now a community that had looked directly into the face of its darkest ghost story and chosen the difficult, agonizing path of absolute restitution over the comfortable illusions of unearned prestige. The cold case of 1985 had finally achieved its perfect, unshakable historical equilibrium, leaving behind an empty throne where an untouchable predator had once ruled, a pristine wilderness where a boy's memory was at last at peace, and a timeless, molecular message to all future generations that no wall of silence is strong enough to withstand the patient, unyielding light of the truth. The structural legacy of the Nicholas Vance case continued to ripple through the global academic community, prompting a complete, fundamental reevaluation of ethical standards within medical research and corporate biotechnology. In the late summer of 2027, the International Federation of Medical Ethics officially ratified the Vance Protocols, a comprehensive, legally binding treaty that mandated the immediate, universal implementation of absolute genetic provenance auditing for all patented surgical techniques, cellular therapies, and clinical methodologies worldwide. This global administrative shift directly addressed the terrifying reality exposed during Nathan's trial, that a predator could murder a colleague, absorb their hidden intellectual property, and spend 4 decades profiting off the stolen insights of a ghost. Under these new international laws, every major research university and private pharmaceutical conglomerate was legally required to maintain an unbroken, hyper-verified chain of authorship documentation, utilizing encrypted digital ledger technology to ensure that the scientific breakthroughs of working-class students could never again be violently hijacked by predatory administrators or elite institutional figures. The specific, newly weaponized science of deep-dive epigenetic mapping experienced an unprecedented, multi-billion-dollar wave of public and private funding, rapidly accelerating the technical capabilities of cold case squads across Western Europe, Asia, and the Americas. The specialized laboratory arrays that had successfully deciphered the unique cellular methylation patterns within the 1985 convertible were miniaturized and deployed to major regional transport hubs, international border crossings, and federal forensic depots, transforming the abstract molecular theory of the Vance case into an everyday, operational shield for global human rights enforcement. Homicide detectives operating in remote, historically underfunded jurisdictions were suddenly equipped with handheld genomic scanners capable of extracting, digitizing, and identifying microscopic biological signatures from decades-old evidence containers within a matter of minutes. The total structural predictability of this new molecular warfare effectively eliminated the concept of the stagnant file, creating an environment where the physical passage of time was no longer viewed by fugitives as a reliable sanctuary, but as a slow, calculating countdown toward an inevitable date with federal justice. In the sun-baked suburbs of the Phoenix Valley, the massive socioeconomic vacuum left behind by the complete liquidation of the Vance corporate empire was systematically filled by a new generation of community-driven, nonprofit healthcare networks that placed absolute social transparency at the absolute core of their operational charters. The millions of dollars in recovered capital pulled from Nathan's hidden Luxembourg bank accounts were formally channeled into the construction of a network of state-of-the-art public medical clinics scattered across the economically marginalized sectors of the state, ensuring that the financial proceeds of a monster's multi-decade deception were actively used to heal the very communities he had exploited for his personal prestige. These new facilities were not built as towering, intimidating monuments of concrete and reflective glass designed to celebrate the names of wealthy corporate donors. They were constructed as humble, highly accessible community sanctuaries, their entryways intentionally adorned with simple, framed photographs of Nicholas Vance alongside detailed, translated guides explaining how ordinary citizens could access high-quality, fully transparent preventative health care without fear of institutional exploitation. The physical reality of the Superstition Mountains continued to stand as an unyielding, majestic backdrop to this historic era of civic transformation, its rugged granite peaks and deep, shadow-swept canyons remaining entirely silent as the modern world rearranged itself at their feet. The granite plaza dedicated to Nicholas Vance had grown from a simple, localized memorial site into an internationally recognized symbol of unyielding moral resistance, attracting regular delegations of human rights advocates, legal scholars, and forensic scientists who wished to stand before the bronze sundial and absorb the silent, profound lesson of its architecture. The garden of native desert flora surrounding the granite stones had matured beautifully, its dense clusters of wild lavender, crimson desert sage, and golden jojoba plants blooming with a fierce, independent vitality that filled the mountain air with a clean, uncorrupted sweetness that seemed to wash away the last remaining traces of the valley's historical trauma. As the late afternoon sun of a new year began to slowly illuminate the valley floor, casting a long, sharp amber shadow from the bronze sundial across the highly polished granite base, the true, permanent equilibrium of the case became absolute. The memory of the brilliant 22-year-old medical student who had been brutally struck down in the dark was no longer an open, weeping wound on the collective consciousness of the state. His identity had been completely rescued, his technical legacy preserved, and his stolen future fully, beautifully vindicated by the very laws that had been designed to protect his executioner. The unyielding precision of modern molecular science had broken the perfect crime, demonstrating to all future generations that no matter how much wealth is accumulated, how many monuments are built, or how many decades are allowed to pass, the truth remains an absolute, unstoppable cosmic force that will eventually, inevitably demand its debt in full from the architects of deception.